I'm fond of saying that, and this is an old joke, but I'm going to use it anyway. As a college president, my job was to break up good conversation, and so that's what I'm doing here. I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to give a warm welcome to everybody here in person with us today, and the more than 800 or 900 folks who are online for this much anticipated event. I guess it goes to say when we throw a party, we really know how to do it. So thank you for being here. This is a record number of attendees at a TBF convening, which speaks to the moment that we are living through, as well as the uncertainty and urgency of the moment, and what we all know will be not a sprint, but a marathon. Participating in events like this one today have become essential for so many of us. Being in community with others, continuing the good work to improve lives and strengthen communities, no matter how sobering the content, is to me, and I hope for you as well, affirming and certainly deeply meaningful. I'm grateful for this time together, and I believe that community, as it always does, will triumph over chaos. And in this room and online today, as I said, there are almost 300 organizations represented, whose missions are centered on helping others, whose efforts hold together an increasingly fragile social network while helping the most vulnerable and marginalized among us to find survival, to find hope, and to find meaning in their work and in their lives. Our collective effort is ennobling and magnificently compelling, and I'm so glad to see so many of you here today. Our convening and shared purpose is in sharp contrast with the federal administration that is, at its core, mean-spirited, dreadfully callous, uncaring, and downright cruel. There's something distorted with an administration who makes it harder for our organizations to feed, to aid, to house, to shelter, to heal, to defend, to repair, to teach, to advocate, to sustain, to strengthen, and build better communities. And amazingly, we have folks who voted for the federal administration who told them to their face, I'm going to take away your health care. What? Really? We are committed to meeting this moment alongside you. At a start this week, released almost $3 million in responsive funds to 77 nonprofits. Thank you. And I thank you for your applause, but I do want to say this is not a single effort. This is a joint effort. We're here because all of us want to be here and to be in community with each other, and I want to thank you for all of your support and assistance. So we funded 77 nonprofits, expanded with extra support and commitments from TBF's community of donors. The Safety Net Grants program and that selection was 100% community-led. We didn't make the selection, you did. 100% of those who were selected for these grants were made by people like you, informed by local leaders, those who, like you, understand the issues, who understand the challenges and the opportunities woven into the diversity of every community. We're leveraging our convening power and our research role to ensure that our collective work continues. Our work together is resonant, it has purpose, and it has meaning. And this work is as important today as it was 110 years ago at the founding of the Boston Foundation. The expression of our common heritage is simple but profound. Where we see a wrong, we seek to right it. Where we see a hurt, we seek to soothe it. And where we see a broken heart, we seek to mend it. This is not a time to rest. This is a time to be restless and a time to be relentless in the pursuit of what is right and just. And as Dr. King said, there comes a time when silence is betrayal. When silence is betrayal. And this is one of those times. And so I challenge all of you to stay focused on what really matters. I challenge you to lift up your sweet and strong voices wherever you are, to lift up your hands of compassion, your hands of hope, and your hands of faith. And know that if we are in word and deed a nation committed to equality and equity and social justice, our hope is that out of the rich diversity of human experience, we can create communities more beautiful and made more effective by their pluralism. Communities that will turn the tide of human want into a sea of joy and justice and light and hope. And know deep down inside that moral courage is greater than fame or fortune, and that it outlasts both. So again, thank you so very, very much for being here this afternoon. Now, before I give up the microphone, I want to express my gratitude to the teams at TBF, the Massachusetts Nonprofit Network, and MassInc Polling, and others, too many to name, for all of their great work to bring us together today. And a special note of thanks to our esteemed panelists, who you will hear from very soon, Shanique Rodriguez, Mary Shelton Roberts, and Diane Yentel. And mostly I want to thank all of you for being a part of today's event and a part of one of the most important gatherings of this year. And I really mean that. One that I believe will be consequential to our collective work. And so now I'm pleased to introduce and turn it over to Jim Clockey, who's the CEO of the Massachusetts Nonprofit Network. MNN, as you know, works to strengthen the nonprofit sector with public policy, advocacy, programs, and services that help nonprofits grow and thrive, and communications to tell the story of their transformative work. MNN has over 700, it has 700 member organizations, come from all regions of the Commonwealth and all subsectors of the nonprofit community. So Jim, thank you in advance for all of your support and help and work to bring us all together. Thank you. Thank
you. Lee, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. With apologies for a scratchy throat. It's the only thing left of a bad cold, but I first want to begin with thanks to Lee and the TBF team, the MassInc team, the MNN team. It was a super coalition of people that came together in this project, and it's been a pleasure to work with all of you on it. You will not be surprised to hear me say that the survey does not have good news. We face really an existential threat. The nonprofit sector is under attack, as are other pillars of civil society. In fact, it's hard to imagine a pillar of civil society that this administration has not tried to go after in the last month, but that's a conversation for the days ahead. We have a long, hard road to travel, but we as a sector, we also have a lot of great strengths that we can bring to this work. And I want to frame the discussion by just touching on three of the biggest strengths that we as a sector will bring to the fight ahead. The first is that we are large. We at MNN like to tell people that over 500,000 Massachusetts residents work at nonprofits. But that's not the whole sector. 1.1 million Massachusetts residents made a charitable donation to a nonprofit last year, and hundreds of thousands more serve nonprofits as volunteers and board members and advisors. So what does that mean? It means our sector in Massachusetts is over 2 million people strong. That matters. Among other things, it means that we have allies everywhere, in this room and across the state. So remember that when the days get tough and the nights are long. The second great strength that I want to point to is that our sector is incredibly innovative and resourceful. You all know that, but let's think back a minute to where we were 5.5 years ago. Things weren't great, but they were pretty good. And then what happened? We got hammered with three existential crises: a public health crisis, a racial justice crisis, and an economic opportunity crisis. And what did nonprofits do? They stood up, they rallied, they swung into action. They started doing all kinds of things they had never done before to meet emergency needs. Funders stepped up. This foundation transformed its giving, ramped up its giving, and the results were that we met needs. So many organizations did so many new things. After-school programs became food distribution centers, and less than a year later, the food banks were giving out vaccines. Again, no one predicted it a year in advance. Everybody rallied, everybody stood up, and it's an example for what we need to do going forward. The third great strength we have is the amazing example of all the people who came before us. The organizations that we work for, and the values and the progress that we work to protect and extend exist because people who came before us were strong and courageous and innovative and resilient, and they set the example for all of us. We have a great wellspring of leadership and lessons to draw upon. We will need all of those strengths. We will need more support from all of our supporters in the months ahead, and we will need to forge new partnerships. Those other pillars of civil society that are under attack, we are all in the same boat with them. But in this boat, we're going to work together. We're going to be smarter than ever. We're going to be stronger than ever, and we're going to meet all of these challenges. And the path to that work begins today, and we are very, very grateful to be in the journey with all of you. Thank you for being here. I will now take a break to get a drink of water and turn the podium over to Steve Casella, the president of the Massing Polling Group, and his colleague Zaina Basma Doyle, the research director at Massing Polling Group, who will take us through the survey results. Steve and Zaina.
Thank you. Y'all hearing me okay in the back? Good? Okay. I'm Steve Casella. I'm the president of the Massing Polling Group. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Lee, and thank you all for being here. What we're here today to do is to talk about the results of a survey that we conducted among Massachusetts nonprofit employees and leaders back in February and March. So can we go ahead and put up the slides? Okay, great. Just by way of quick introduction, the Massing Polling Group is located here in Boston. We've been around for about 15 years. We do surveys on politics, on policy, on education, transportation, and everything in between. So this particular survey, go ahead to the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, we have the clicker right here. How handy. Like, why aren't our slides showing up? This particular survey that we're talking about, a little bit about what the survey is, what the results look like as we're walking through them. This is a survey of 523 employees and leaders of Massachusetts nonprofits all across the state. And importantly, the survey was done in February and March. Well, why is that important? Significantly because a lot of it's about what people thought was going to happen. And we just want to stop and recognize that a lot of the stuff that people were talking about in February and March has now happened or is now happening. So we talk about federal funding, we talk about impacts on the populations you all serve and so forth, and a lot of that now, what people were anticipating is now ongoing. Just a bit more about the survey itself. It was translated into 6 languages and distributed both by MNN, TBF, and a range of others, some of whom are in this room. So thank you very much both for your help in distributing the survey and also participating in the survey. For any of you who participated, thank you also for doing that. Who took the survey is also of interest, just as you're looking at the results, just a sense of who the participants were, who the respondents were in the survey. I'd say to start with, we had a lot of senior leaders, a lot of executive directors, a lot of presidents, CEOs, and so forth. We also had a very wide range of budget levels. So we had down to very small nonprofits all the way up to very large multi-million-dollar nonprofits. You also see there the demographics of who responded, both in terms of the respondents and then also the organizations that they lead. One quick note on all of this is if you want more information about any of this, all of this information is posted on our website at massingpolling.com, both the overall results and then broken down in all different kinds of ways. So if you're wondering how any of these results vary by larger or smaller organizations or whether or not you get federal funds, all of that's posted there, so please do take a look. Speaking of federal funds, just over half of the organizations that were surveyed said that their organization does receive federal funding, and that will become very important as we go through the results and break them down. In terms of who the respondents, what populations the respondents said that they serve, as you can see, these add up to much more than 100% because many of you serve lots of different populations. But just to kind of call out the couple at the top of the chart, you see that the most common answers were low-income people, people of color. We had more than half say that they serve immigrants, youth and teens, LGBTQ, and so forth and so on. Okay, so then the next set of charts is about how survey respondents think that Massachusetts as a whole and the sector will fare under the new administration. And with all of these, the question text is at the bottom. But for this particular slide, what the question was, was, do you think Massachusetts will be better off or worse off under the Trump administration, more or less? And you can see that 77% said that they think that the state of Massachusetts will be much worse off. Another 14% said a little worse off, and just about 2% said any version of better off. So almost everybody said worse off, with a majority of respondents overall saying much worse off. We also then asked about, how about the individual population that you serve? Do you think they will be better off or worse off under the Trump administration? And this chart looks very similar to the last chart. I did advance the slide, but the shape of it is very much the same, where you see 78% saying much worse off and 14% saying a little worse off, as far as how people think that the population that their nonprofit serves will be under the Trump administration. You can also, if you're interested, do go to the website and see, but it varies only a little bit when you look at different nonprofits based on which populations they serve. In other words, they all pretty much, this is kind of the shape for all types of nonprofits and whoever they serve and whatever their mission is. You're seeing 75 to 85% much worse off, and 90 to 95% saying some variation of worse off. Then this question was actually one which we asked on an open-ended basis, where we just asked, okay, if you said worse off, which most people did, how exactly? How will the populations that you serve be worse off under the Trump administration? And people could enter whatever they wanted, and then we, thank you to the team who all worked on this, we took them and grouped the comments into sets and grouped them into topics. So for example, 42% identified in some way that it would be a loss of funding or loss of services. That's how they responded. And then 34% said something about the impacts on vulnerable populations. You can also see on this chart that people identified more than one topic, just because it adds up to more than 100%. But you can see that overall, kind of looking at the top three, we're talking about loss of funding, loss of services, the impacts that those will have, and then economic, and even scanning a bit further down than that, health impacts. We did hear a lot about that, health impacts and mental health impacts on the populations that people serve. These are two examples of the comments that we got to that question, and the first one is federal cuts to and attacks on basic civil rights and liberties impact everyone in the populations we serve. And you can see they had a bit more to say about that. And the bottom one, the level of fear in the community we serve has increased. The impacts on social services will also negatively affect their lives. So there's literally hundreds of comments that are on similar topics, but these I think illustrate the kinds of things that people are talking about and the things that were on respondents' minds. The next question was about whether or not people think that demand will increase or demand will decrease. So we've talked a little bit about impacts, but how about in terms of the demand for the services that you all provide? We found overall 64% said that yes, they did think that demand for their services would increase. And that number was particularly high for nonprofits who serve, for example, current or former incarcerated people, seniors, and transit riders, immigrants, and so forth and so on. So large majorities said in all cases that they thought that the demand for their services would increase. On a related note, or while that's happening, I should say, respondents also said that they anticipate more challenges, even as demand is increasing, even as it's harder for them to do their work. They also think that there will be more challenges in performing their everyday mission. So what this chart shows is the percent who think that the Trump administration will make it easier or harder to do their work, with the two bars that are showing here on this chart being the bottom one much harder, the top one a little harder, which add up to a total of 91% who said that they think that the Trump administration will make it in some way harder for them to do their work. We also broke this chart down by the middle bar are the nonprofits who say, yes, I do receive federal funding, or we do, and the bar on the right is a group who do not receive federal funding. So what sticks out is that among those who do receive federal funding, you're up to 95% who think that their work will be made harder. But even among those who don't, you still have 83% saying that they think that their work's going to get harder, with just about half saying that they think it's going to get much harder. So that was by far the most common point of view about what the impact will be. Funding is at the top of everybody's minds, and the next series of slides have to do with funding, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Zaina to take us through that section.
Thank you, Steve. So just picking up here, we then asked nonprofits how they think the work of their organization will be affected under the Trump administration. And right up top, we see a majority, 58%, saying they expect anticipated funding cuts, and the next major impact being on the populations they serve. So if you go down to the middle, we see already lost funding 8%. As Steve noted earlier, this survey was done in late February to early March, and we anticipate that number would be a lot higher if we did the survey right now. Here are some additional quotes. I'll just highlight a piece of it. Our current clients are already afraid to meet their volunteer tutors in public. They're canceling sessions more frequently due to fear. We fear our numbers of new clients will decline. The second quote, they're primarily federally funded, do not have reserves. Our organization may no longer be viable as a result of the current and future actions by the Trump administration. So we then asked nonprofits, do you receive federal funding from the government? And what you see in the chart on the left in dark blue is yes, 58% of respondents do receive federal funding, 35% said no. So we asked those who do receive federal funding, do you anticipate it to increase, decrease, or stay the same in the future? And an overwhelming majority, 89%, say they expect their funding to decrease. Notably, no respondents, 0%, said they expect it to increase, and only 2% say they expect their funding to stay the same. So what type of funding that these organizations received did they expect to be cut? I also want to pause here and say, remember when this survey was done, and that a lot of the types of fundings that go within these open-ended categories have already been cut. For example, you may see AmeriCorps here on this list, and as many of you know, AmeriCorps has already seen very significant impacts and is facing a very uncertain future. But let's look at the rest of this chart based on when they answered. Up top, we see 25% of responses anticipate health and human service funding to be cut, followed by housing, economic, and community development funding. Notably, other nonprofits mentioned education, climate, environment, food, and agriculture are the types of funds they have that they anticipate to decrease in the future. A few additional quotes. 30% of our revenue is federally funded. The government claims that our program will continue, but we have seen no proof of that. And currently they owe us $225,000 from services rendered in 2024. I have already had to lay off 40% of my staff. So now continuing to think about the future, we then asked nonprofits if they think their organization's financial condition will be worse off, better off, or the same in a year from now under the Trump administration. Right up top, we see in dark red and light red across organizations overall, a majority say that their organization will be worse off. And if you shift to the bottom chart of organizations that receive federal funding, that number jumps, just showing that they expect their financial condition to worsen as the year goes on. Continuing to think about the future, we then asked nonprofits if they have done any contingency planning. And what you see in the dark red is overall, 40% of organizations have done some contingency planning, but 44% plan to do so. In dark blue, we see among those who receive federal funding, over half have already been contingency planning, and another 38% plan to do so. And in light blue, among nonprofits that don't receive federal funding, over half plan to do so in the future. We then asked nonprofits, over the next 4 years, do you anticipate any of these as needs for your organization? And as expected, right up top, 86% say fundraising will be their main need and priority in the future. We also see advocacy, staffing levels, direct services, and DEIB initiatives being main focuses for these nonprofits. Thinking about their organization's funding streams, we then asked, how important are individual donations to your nonprofit? And starting on the left side, overall, we see 63% of organizations saying they're very important. And as you shift to the right, that importance grows among organizations that don't receive federal funding, but that number is high across the board. Another quote connected to that last slide, we are bracing for a number of downstream potential impacts. If philanthropic dollars shift to fill the gaps of government funding, that would make the philanthropic landscape that we rely on more competitive. And lastly, we asked nonprofits if they take part in any forms of advocacy or lobbying. And what you see in the left three charts, over half of nonprofits say they do take part in advocacy, but less are more likely to take part in lobbying. But overall, the over half take part in advocacy. That's our last data slide, but I'm going to pass it over to Steve to close us out.
Thank you, Zaina. So just before I pass it back to Jim and the panel, just a few words on conclusion. So as you have no doubt by now witnessed, nearly universally, people into nonprofits in Massachusetts are anticipating a negative impact from what's going on with the Trump administration. That's not breaking news to anybody in this room, of course. And anticipating more challenges, both in terms of what their populations are facing and how difficult it's going to be for nonprofits to do their work in Massachusetts and more broadly, both because of budgets and for many other reasons. Needless to say, federal funding is at the top of people's minds, both in terms of the impacts again on the populations and on what nonprofits themselves are going through. And it's also, as Zaina pointed out, it's really not only federal dollars, because as federal dollars shift, the shape of the need shifts and the shape of the whole shifts, and where philanthropic dollars go shift is what a lot of nonprofit leaders are anticipating. So, of course, fundraising becomes top of mind for a lot of people. A lot of nonprofits as they're facing those challenges, which shines the light back on, or which raises the question of exactly what the role of philanthropy is in responding to the current crisis. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Jim to introduce the panel.
So we'll have our panelists all come up, and we will have the panel discussion for 20 to 30 minutes. We're going to leave some time at the end for questions from all of you. And while we probably can't cover everything that's on everybody's minds today, we'll try to do the best we can and build on this discussion going forward. So let me do the following. I am going to introduce each panelist briefly, and then I'm going to ask them to just simply open up by telling us about their work in this moment. What are you doing now? We're going to talk about what everybody's doing now, and then we're going to talk about what we all need to do going forward. The picture that's been painted by the survey is a difficult one, but step one in dealing with a problem is understanding it. Now we understand it. Step two is doing things about it, and that's what this discussion is going to be about. First, we have Diane Yentel, the President and the Chief Executive Officer of the National Council of Nonprofits, which is based in Washington, D.C. NCN is the largest network of nonprofits in North America. It serves both nonprofit associations such as MNN and also individual nonprofits with advocacy services and communications. Diane, prior to coming to NCN recently, led the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. And I will say as well, for those of you who have been following all these legal battles, Diane will talk about it, Diane's been leading them, okay? All the progress so far, that's been NCN. So tell us about your work.
Sure. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for this opportunity. It's always good to be in community with people who are struggling with the same issues and fighting for the same things. So at the National Council of Nonprofits, the way we talk about our work broadly is we inform, we connect, and we champion the nonprofit sector broadly. And that work has clearly never been more important. The work that all of us are doing in that space has never been more important, with the threats to the entire sector being so substantial, so existential, so immediate. And the threats are so great that the way we view them at NCN is that there's really no way for the nonprofit sector to end this year in a neutral place, right? There's no way to end the year more or less where we started. We'll either end the year somewhere on a spectrum of harm, from potentially harmed, from somewhat harmed to really potentially decimated, or I really believe we can end it strengthened in the way that we respond to this moment. So strengthened not just in spite of, but because of these threats that we face. So the work that we're doing at NCN, we put into 4 different pillars. A legal strategy. So as Jim mentioned, we are part of 2 lawsuits against the administration, both of which have nationwide preliminary injunctions, both of which are currently being appealed by the Department of Justice. But we're also in the legal space thinking about how we work with nonprofits to help you understand the legal parameters, and rather than overcorrecting, really leaning into continuing to do the important work that we all need to do. The second part of the strategy is around communications, so looking at a really proactive, positive communications campaign to shore up support, and also a crisis communications plan so that we can have a unified response in defending the sector. The third part is around advocacy and education. We have our work cut out on Capitol Hill to defend the nonprofit sector as well. And then finally around safety and security for nonprofit organizations, for leaders who are speaking out and in this increasingly divided and sometimes violent rhetoric, but also the safety and security of organizations and their missions and your work. So as the audits and as the investigations pick up, to think about how we can help prepare and respond to those.
Terrific, Diane. I want you all to know NCN has amazing resources available on their website. MNN picks those up on our website, and there's a lot of support and guidance and assistance on all those topics and more. Next, we're going to turn to Mary Skelton Roberts, Chief Executive Officer of Philanthropy Massachusetts. We're among friends. We all know Philanthropy Massachusetts, a membership association of philanthropies and nonprofits. It promotes the practice and the expansion of effective and responsible philanthropy across the state. Mary's prior experience includes leadership roles at the Climate Beacon Conference, the Energy Foundation, the Barr Foundation, and more. Like Diane, Mary is fairly new to her role, but she has jumped right in. The topic of fundraising and philanthropic support is important to all of us, and we're really delighted that Mary could be here today.
Great, good to be here. Nice to meet you. So I've been in my role for about a year. Philanthropy Massachusetts is the largest network that has both funders and nonprofits. We have about 160 funders, and when you know one funder, you know one. The Boston Foundation is in our network. We have some of the large private funders. We have the banks that have funding arms. We have individual donors. It is a real sort of network of funders. And then on the other side, we represent about 500 nonprofits. And our work at Philanthropy Massachusetts, it's really being the bridge between the two sectors. We spend a lot of time making meaning of what it means to be in this sector right now. If you're in philanthropy, what is shifting? What are the concerns that we're seeing? One of the things I think sometimes nonprofits don't quite understand is that philanthropy, we're a 501c3 as well. So foundations are under threat as well. So for us, when we look at the philanthropic side, we're also providing that kind of sort of support and assistance. On the nonprofit side, what we're trying to do is bring people together and also help you understand what's happening in philanthropy in Massachusetts and how is it affecting the nonprofit sector in real time. We have done lots of convenings. We had a Western Funders convening. May 19th, we're doing something in collaboration with the Boston Foundation to understand Latino giving across the Commonwealth. I mean, our job really is to sort of say, what is happening right now? How do we make sense of it from the philanthropic side and from the nonprofit? How do we bring people together to strategize, do scenario planning, understand what is changing? And then more importantly, to rally the sector. And in this specific instance is to rally the philanthropic sector to say, this is our moment, we were built for this moment, and what do we need to do to help support the nonprofit sector? So in a nutshell, there's more to come, but that's a lot of what we're doing. Our role is we want to be partners, we want to be supporters. When we need to lead, we want to lead, and we want to help the sector do that effectively.
Terrific. Mary, thank you. We are also delighted to have Shanique Rodriguez on the panel, the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Voter Table. Many frequent visitors to this room know the Voter Table well because of work and prior partnerships on the census. The next census is coming. It's not here yet, but it's coming, but we have a few issues to work on before that. The Voter Table is a coalition of over 40+ organizations that fight for resources, representation, and power for communities of color, working class people, new citizens, and youth in Massachusetts. Shanique has dedicated nearly a decade to organizing in BIPOC communities across Massachusetts, and it's great to have you with us today. Shanique.
Thank you, Jim. This is a difficult time, I think, in the movement space for many of us. For the Voter Table specifically, as Jim mentioned, we are a nonprofit civic engagement organization really focused around voting rights. But the members of our table don't only just do voting rights or civic engagement work. They are also service providers. They are also working in the immigration field. So many of the things that you saw in sort of the reflections of the survey of the different sectors, all of our partners work in those different sectors. So it's a tall order for us to sort of hold our movement partners right now in this time. For the Voter Table, we are also a part of a national organization called State Voices. We are one of 25 state tables around the country. And I've just come back from a convening with the other executive directors where we really dug into what does it mean to support our coalition partners right now in this time. I would be remiss to say that the reason why this is heavy is many of our 501c3 movement partners at the organization are also BIPOC-led, BIPOC serving. We are talking about individuals who are doing work in a time that is also impacting themselves. That these are not people who are far and removed from communities. These are folks that live in community who are leading this work and are trying to fight against an administration, a system, and policies that are not just impacting communities, but impacting themselves as well. So to hold a movement right now is not just about holding community, but also holding the organizers, the activists, the advocacy organizations, and the leaders who are doing this work right now. And I have to say that because when I think about my partners, I see the faces of the people who are running these organizations and are doing this work. For us, we're doing a lot of what Diane is talking about around safety and security. This is something that's come up in our network as a whole across the nation, but also in conversations with our partner. But safety and security is not just about the health and well-being of their organizations, but it is also about how do they do their work now safely. There's a lot of concerns when we have here in Boston a municipal election coming up for the Boston mayoral race. Folks are talking about, well, we work mostly in immigrant communities. Are they going to answer doors? Are they going to feel comfortable going out to vote? How do we approach folks when they are fearful around ICE, right? And so we're talking about how do we put together sort of safety plans, best practices about how to do work right now safely. What does security look like at our public events? And making sure that folks who are coming into spaces, we just heard from one of our partners who do work in the immigrant worker space, that workers are not coming to meetings anymore because they're scared. And that impacts not only organizations, but also community as well, because these are workers who need to be aware of all of the things that are happening in communities and all of the policies that might be impacting them as workers. And this is not to say that this is just around undocumented folks. This is also about folks who are not undocumented, but may know undocumented people, may be related to some, that this is not only a fear for themselves, but also their family members, their children in school. We are also looking at pulling together rapid response funding within our organization to have rapid response dollars available for our partners should they need them immediately. We are working with our partner organizations and coalitions like Lawyers for Civil Rights, who recently had partnered with TBF to provide a legal clinic for folks to be thinking about what are some of the legal aspects, if they're working in immigration field, that they should be prepared for. And then we're also doing the advocacy work, making sure that we are signing on to advocacy letters to the administration, but also working here in Massachusetts to make sure that our laws and policies are up to snuff so that the federal impacts are less so for Massachusetts. And that's not just in the civic engagement space, but also in issues like immigration, as well as criminal justice and civil rights.
Shanique, thank you. And that actually sets up I think one of the questions that Diane is uniquely qualified to talk about, given head of a national organization. Talk about the concerns Shanique just raised about not only about worker safety, but providing emotional support for nonprofits, workers. And I was reminded as you were talking, we talked about the pandemic. What happened during the pandemic? It was exceptionally stressful work for the people in nonprofits. And we all went through experiences and we went up learning curves about the importance of supporting each other and supporting workers and providing more support of all types for people doing this work. And we're gonna have to go through that again. But not every state is like Massachusetts. What are you hearing and thinking?
Yeah, and there's layers of it too, right?
Yeah.
Like as Shanique was saying, there's the immediate, there's stepping back, there's the greatest existential threat that we face in this moment, and where all of these individual threats are coming from, is that this administration is pulling from an authoritarian playbook to suppress civil society. And one of the key ways that they're doing that very purposefully in a really coordinated way is to vilify nonprofit organizations as an enemy to be fought. And the language and the rhetoric around this kind of narrative is dangerous, and it's increasingly violent and it's increasingly threatening. And for leaders in this space, and nonprofit leaders that are speaking out, which we all have to do in this moment to protect democracy, there are real immediate threats to them. So one, we have to think about the safety and security of people, of leaders in the field, of leaders of nonprofit organizations, and of all the staff that work there. And there are ways that we can, there are relatively simple things to more difficult things that we can do to increase safety. Like some of the things Shanique mentioned, like thinking about security at on-site events, but also, removing physical addresses from our websites, removing photos, thinking about scrubbing our internet histories, these kind of things that we all have to be thinking about in this moment. And then more broadly than that is, as we heard from our opening speaker, this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. This is not a moment, this is not a snapshot in time, this is a multi-year effort that we've already been in, and that is continuing now. It won't be over soon. So we have to think about the health of the people doing this work and the wellness of people doing this work, and find ways to support each other, that's part of the reason why these new coalitions and relationships are so important, so we can be coordinated, and one can step forward for a time and then be able to step back, and somebody else can step forward in that same time within organizations, but also within the broader movement. These are the things we have to be thinking about and planning for.
Let me pivot. There's so much to cover, but one of the other big headlines from the survey, the need for the question about funding, the question about fundraising, the need people always have for more revenue, which is especially acute now. Mary, you hear from people all the time who are looking for funding. You help people find funding, and we work with great organizations that provide funding. What are you hearing? What do you think the best strategies are, and what kind of guidance would you give people who are in the mode of, my federal funding might be cut, or my state funding might be under pressure? I want to shore up my financial support?
Yeah, great question. So as you saw in one of the slides, it demonstrated that there are some organizations that had already lost their funding, and we know that more have. The bad news is philanthropy is not going to be able to fill the gap. When you're talking about, hundreds of millions, maybe even billions of dollars, there really are not that many philanthropic dollars. But the good news is, particularly here in Massachusetts, is philanthropy has stepped up. Some foundations are paying out early. We're seeing other foundations. TBF did its big pooled funds. There are other foundations that are pooling their funds and getting dollars out the door. National funders, some of them that support us here, for example, MacArthur, instead of doing 5% of their payout, they did 6% over the next 2 years. That's another $125 million. So funders are stepping up. We're also seeing funders providing technical assistance. There's a lot of work around what you've been just talking about. How do you provide support and care? What we try to say to our nonprofits that come to us is a couple of things. We have lots of resources on our website. We have Grant Making 101. But there are a couple of things we try to say. Think about what your work needs to be. So for example, if you're a nonprofit and your work is child care, or let's say you're a nonprofit focused on climate, focus on the work. And some of those back office operations, see if there's another organization or if you can pool those resources. Use the dollars that you have to be mission aligned. Because in a world where the dollars are shrinking, you want to be focused primarily on mission. There are a lot of organizations that are looking at sort of, pooled back office operations. There's one here called Third Sector New England. They do fiscal sponsorship, right? Figure out those parts of the operation that can be sort of taken off the shelf so that you can focus on mission-driven work. We think communications is a big part of the work. Be able to tell your story. How is it affecting people on the ground? What's the connection to advocacy and democracy? So back office operations, try to move those out of your organization if they make sense. Focus on mission-aligned work. Think about how you're building those coalitions across nonprofits and be able to tell your story so it really connects to mission. And lastly, come to our website. We have tons and tons of resources. M&N has tons of resources, Third Sector, New England. This state is very, very resource rich for nonprofits. It doesn't solve the problem that we can't fill the gaps, but at least where we can, there are a lot of resources that might be available.
Thank you. We hear all the time, and we know that no one sector can totally fill a federal gap. But everybody wants to help fill it. And when you find new sources, you develop new partnerships, and sometimes those can have terrific effects over time. Shanika, for organizations that are not in the community activism space right now, but are now thinking about it, or want to get into it, or feel they must, how do they get started? What advice do you give people, and how should people think about this in the months ahead as we enter into this multi-year hurricane, if you will?
Well, I'll start with saying first, see who's doing the work.
Yep.
I think too often we feel excited about jumping in, but there might not be a need for you in that space.
Good.
Or the need for you is to actually take less of a leadership role, but to have a following position where you are supporting the leaders of community. So at the voter table, we invest in the organizations that we invest in because they are often the primary organization in community that everyone knows, that what we call our trusted messengers. Sometimes outside group or national organization or statewide organization may not be this trusted messenger of Springfield or Holyoke or Lawrence. So it's important to identify who are the groups on the ground that are doing this work and have a conversation with them about how can I show up in this moment best for you and in this work. I think that there's a lot of work to be done here in supporting and protecting immigrant families right now. I think that's one of the key issues that have come out of a lot of conversation of all of our groups because of the communities in which they serve. Again, BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color, and low-income communities. In Massachusetts, what that looks like is the 26 gateway cities of Massachusetts. And oftentimes, the further west you go of Boston, the number of those organizations dwindle. So there's always a need to support organizations in Western Mass and Worcester County. If you go, north of Worcester, you're looking at Leominster, Fitchburg, all of these areas. There are less and less nonprofits or community organizations, but all of them are facing all of these issues at the same time. So if there's only one or two in these communities doing this work, they're doing everything under the sun and could use some support. But immigration is one of the key things that I know across the board a lot of my organizations are doing or are coming up against, whether it's trying to pull together hotlines for folks to talk about when they see ICE in community, whether that's legal clinics. If you are a lawyer, this is a great time to be volunteering your time to support organizations and working pro bono to help groups right now. And again, if you are also looking at civil rights and democracy work, there's plenty of space and work to be done, especially this year where elections are still happening. Elections are happening every year. Sadly for me, every year I'm in an election, and every year there is a cost of why it is important. But this year specifically, this is the year where lower voter turnout, even with our super voters, are happening, even more so in a primary. But these are critical races that are impacting communities. These are mayor races, school committee, right? These are the folks who will eventually run for state rep, state senator, or be congressional leaders one day. So every election matters, and now is the time to also be volunteering your time. Sometimes it's not about, setting up base and doing the work. Sometimes it's just being there to support others who are doing the work by volunteering your time.
That's excellent. And that is a segue to one other question I want to be sure we cover before we open the floor. I will call it the election red state, blue state dilemma. We are in a wonderful state that has a lot of great support for the work of nonprofits. The biggest national political battles, which will determine where some of these issues go long term, are not going to be fought in Massachusetts. They're going to be fought in other places. Diane knows that well. Diane works with associations around the country who are grappling with these questions. And so Diane, A, tell us about that, but B, for those of us in blue states who might have relatives or friends or old classmates in purple and red states, what should we talk about with our friends and relatives in the next 18 months?
That's a good question. Let me focus on the topic at hand. So I think, so there's so much that nonprofits in blue states need to be doing right now.
Good.
One of the challenges I think that we're facing nationwide in this moment in responding to these threats is the level of silence that there is the number of leaders and organizations and members of Congress that are staying silent when we should all be speaking out in our own ways. And there's levels of protection too for who it's easier or more difficult to speak out in this time. And I think, when it comes to nonprofit organizations, looking at organizations that, for example, national nonprofit organizations that don't receive federal funding, that are white-led, have the least at risk in this moment and the greatest obligation to be speaking out and to be very visible and to be talking about the threats and why they matter. And the same, I think, can be said for nonprofits in blue states, right? You have a level of protection where nonprofits in red states have much greater at risk. So just speaking out about the vilification, speaking out about all that is not normal in this moment and noting it is incredibly important. And people in blue states have opportunity to do that. Also opportunity and a little bit more space, because the threats maybe are less immediate, to be doing some of that cross-sector organizing and building some of that solidarity that we in the nonprofit sector don't typically have, but need to have in this moment.
Mary?
Yeah, I have a little different approach to this. We can't keep trying to solve new problems in old ways, right? What we're experiencing is completely unprecedented. And when you are in a blue state like Massachusetts that has some of the protections that we have, When you start looking at New England plus New York, maybe California, we're talking about 80% of the US economy flows through the East and West Coast. We've got to start thinking about how do you flex your political muscle in different ways, right? Like, my colleagues know this. They hear me ranting about this every day. Like, how is it possible that Massachusetts gives more money to the federal government and they're telling us they're cutting our funds? Like, there has to be a different conversation, and we've got to start thinking about how do the nonprofits and philanthropy and those that can take risks start asking different questions and really pushing back. Because otherwise we're going to be responsive in a way that's not going to be helpful to us. Like, can we set a new agenda? Can we start pushing? Like, can we start asking the states' rights question? Because when you got a bully in the playground, you can't hope that bully's going to just stop because he needs to do the right thing, right? So I just want to push us to, like, you know, we got a lot of political and we have even more financial. And this is an administration, they follow the dollars. So use the dollars to, like, think about something different. So that's kind of my, yeah.
That's great. That's great. Shanique.
Mary's exactly right about thinking about this in a different way. I would say that I'm going to be the outlier and say Massachusetts isn't as blue as you think it is.
That's right.
You know, we have been on the top 10 least effective legislature. We were the last in the last budget session to actually file a budget in the country. We at the voter table, we look at vote history and do, you know, a lot of respect to my data team who are data engineers and much more knowledgeable about than this and me. But what we have saw out of the last election is a shift in ideology in many voters, even voters in BIPOC communities, against blue ideologies, if you will. And so I think that we spent a lot of time pooling our funds into political parties, instead of into people, into movements, and into organizations who are actually doing the boots on the ground work, who are not doing transactional relationships with folks. That's the work that we do at the voter table. That this isn't just about an election cycle. This is about everything in your life. And we build relationships with folks in community in order to create trust and be able to shift what kind of conversations that we're having. But the time that we're in calls for us to do more than put our bets behind parties, behind single elections, but really about assessing what does it mean to have progressive values really and truly, especially here in Massachusetts. And what are we willing to do for that idea and to make that a reality? And that's the question that we should all be asking ourselves right now. What is it going to take to have true change and true democracy? What does it mean to build a multiracial democracy in which all of our voices are represented every time we go to a ballot box? That's not true in Massachusetts. That is absolutely not true. From where I sit in my community, and I'm from Western Mass in the city of Springfield, I'm an immigrant to this country. And I would tell you that my reality every day in the community that I live is that this ain't no blue place. And that blue leaders are covert ops of something else. And it's just a handful that I can count on my two hands that I really feel are at Beacon Hill or in Congress right now, really, really fighting on the issues and are taking on the tough challenges and are not afraid to be put in a basement or to not get their bills passed or to not be Senate leaders or have leadership positions because they stand firm with communities. We need more of that in the building, in all of our buildings of government, but we don't have that. And so I think in this moment, what this calls upon is for us to really think about what does it mean to be truly progressive in this country, to be truly a state that's progressive, and what does it mean to build that leadership, not just in a building, but from community up.
Thank you. Let me now throw it open for questions from the audience, and I think there's a couple people with mics, and let me ask everybody, we're going to try to cover a lot of topics and get a lot of great information out. So if you can ask really short questions, we'll try to give really short answers and make this as terrific as possible. Who would like to go first? If no one puts their hand up, I'm going to ask a question about the federal budget. Yes.
My name is Heather. I work for a nonprofit, RIA, Ready Inspire Act. We serve adults that are in the process of healing from experiences in the sex trade, whether that's trafficking, exploitation, prostitution. We serve about 100 people a year across the state. My question is how to change that conversation. You suggested to have a different approach to our dialogue and really thinking about states' rights. Could you be really specific and granular about what does that look like for a citizen? What does that look like for a nonprofit leader? What does that look like for parents? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah.
Thank
so
you.
The moment we're dealing with right now was started about 20 years ago. So there were two philanthropists that wanted to do a couple of things. They wanted to make sure that the United States did not transition to clean energy. And they developed a strategy that was like, we're not going to deal with the federal government. We're going to take the state legislatures. It's your point. We're going to win local elections. They funded community advocacy. They funded the, ALEC, the American Legal Exchange Council. They went into neighborhoods, right? And they started taking over sort of local commissions. Then they started ensuring that the courts were pretty stacked. And so if we're going to dismantle that system, but more importantly, think about how we're going to do it in more of the progressive circles, we need to think about how do we bring together really good jurists that can help us think about maybe state rights. Are there some ways in which federal and this is gonna, are there some ways, I know I'm like nervous about what I'm gonna say, but I'm gonna say it. Should we be looking at our tax structure? Do we need to be thinking about the tax codes, like asking ourselves a whole bunch of different questions and beginning to form one strategy? Like one of the challenges we have in this sector is that we tend to fund a lot of things and it's let a thousand flowers bloom, which is great when you're trying to do like lots of different things. But in this moment, we've got to say, what is it that we're trying to accomplish and what does it look like if we're all sort of steering in the same direction? Because short of that, I don't know that we can get to where we want to go. And I mean, I am a big fan of trust-based philanthropy, but it starts at the table when you're designing the strategy, not after the fact, right? And so what is a strategy that we want to develop? It might be states' rights, it could be something else. But if we don't co-design it and then fund for that strategy, I don't think we get to an outcome that looks different than where we are.
I think what Mary's talking about is alignment. I think too often, just to answer your question about leaders in the work, is that we're doing our work in silos. And that we are not sitting at different tables that may not seem like it aligns with our issues, but there's always alignment in the struggle. We are all experiencing one struggle or the other, and that in itself is our connectivity. But different sectors work in their little coalitions, and we never sit at a table together and say, what does it look like to win on these 6 things,
Yep.
right? And how do we all play a role in that? Because we all do. The work that you do is still important to democracy. I have to make sure that what you're trying, and I say this because I used to work for YWCA, so I used to work in sexual assault and domestic violence, and it's an issue that matters most to me. But I never saw that work was different from advocacy, was different from democracy, was different from immigration work, right? Because who of our survivors? Our survivors came from different walks of life. And it meant that they were impacted not just because they had been assaulted, but healthcare was an issue. Immigration status was an issue, right? Where they have to live after they come out of shelter is an issue. And housing, we're in a housing crisis right now. So your organization should be working with housing organizations because you're creating this holistic approach for how you're serving people. But we're not sitting at the same tables and we're not getting aligned, which creates confusion for funders. That's how you end up giving $1,000 to multiple little tiny organizations when we could have an aligned agenda about what true progress looks like for us.
On the funding side, we create that confusion, right? We have, I don't know, somebody on my team, how many foundations do we have? 7,000 or something? I don't know, we know there are a lot. There are like 7,000 foundations. Everybody's funding their own thing. Everyone has their own strategy. Everyone has their own thing. So it doesn't surprise me then that you have lots of nonprofits springing up. So part of what we're trying to do is get the philanthropic community to say, let's align, let's create strategies. What if we did two things really, really well that are comprehensive or systemic, right? What would our outcomes look like? But I think you're absolutely right, Shanique. We have got to do a better job.
Next question, yes. There's a microphone coming.
I'm Kathy Dalton from the Cambridge Nonprofit Coalition. This is not a question, this is a disagreement.
Kathy, can you ask a question?
If we focus only on mission, and we abrogate what you've called the back office, the accounting, the fundraising, the personnel, the outreach, the communication, the legal strategy. Yeah, there's stuff like TSNE shared services, that's great if you have $350,000 up to 1 point something million. That works for some organizations. They have to pay for it, it's not free. I think we actually need to, we're working on this, change people's thinking about what we have to do to accomplish our mission. And how can we not put out the message that we can't fund overhead in the middle of this?
Mary.
Yeah, you have no disagreement from me. I spent many, many years in philanthropy, and you cannot fund an organization without overhead. But in this moment in time, where philanthropy has limited dollars, if you are trying to figure out where can you shave, it may be some of those back office. It's not going to work for everyone, but it has to be something you have to think about. You have to think about it. But trust me, I totally think that we should be funding general ops, we should be funding overhead, but foundations aren't going to be able to do it for every single nonprofit.
Well, and also the federal government is funding. I mean, I think what you're speaking to is this moment of, in reality, the funding is being cut by the federal government and philanthropy is being squeezed and is equally at risk. The administration is coming after foundations too and may, in different ways, limit their ability to give. So in this environment, how do we make sure that as many nonprofits as possible survive this moment and are able to continue doing their work? It's going to require doing some things that are different and uncomfortable and hard.
Diane, let me just raise one other specific question, which has come up a lot in recent months. Different types of nonprofits and philanthropies. The question of people's tax-exempt status. The administration is going after tax-exempt status in highly visible ways with Harvard and others, but there's been a lot of concern about this. So for people out there who are wondering, am I at risk? What if they come after me? What do I do? What should they be thinking about?
Well, for all of the actions that the administration is taking, all of the different executive orders or these very real threats to tax-exempt status, all of us need to be thinking about assessing all of our work, looking for any areas of vulnerabilities within our organization, and then looking for ways to mitigate those vulnerabilities or to be ready to speak to them if we need to, if there's an investigation or a congressional hearing or some other type of way where our inner workings of our organizations are exposed. How will we talk about any vulnerabilities that are there? We should all be doing that right now. And for tax-exempt status, there is a very real threat. We've seen Harvard as the most concrete, but there are also other executive orders being actively debated within the White House around stripping certain types of nonprofits from stripping their tax-exempt status. It could be used as a pay-for in tax reform, and that's been a possibility for a while, but in this environment it becomes even more possible and realistic. So for those, we have to, again, I think, be very unified and very vocal about just how much of a red line this is. So even if it's Harvard University, which feels remote in some ways from the work that we're doing in communities, it is very much connected. And if the administration finds a way to illegally strip any organization of its status, that is an immediate threat to your organization, because that could be next. So again, it just comes back to the need for advocacy and being vocal. But in the meantime, being really honest about your own organizations, assessing all of the risk and mitigating where you can.
I know one of the other sets of resources out there, deep in this area, are legal resources. M&N's, we have affiliate law firm members who can provide some free. Lawyers Clearinghouse is a fantastic organization whose mission is connecting nonprofits with pro bono legal assistance. And there are many other law firms that want to do more in this area. So it's a battle we wish we didn't have to fight,
Yeah.
but we do. And you're telling us how, and there are resources out there.
Yeah.
Let me go this way for questions. Hi.
Thank you. My name is Angela Lett. I work at the Elliott School of Fine and Applied Arts. And just following up on this discussion, which I think is so important, the vast majority of the nonprofits in here are not at the level of Harvard. Very few are. And so I'm wondering if there's anything that's happening on the advocacy front with Mass Nonprofit Network, National Council of Nonprofits, as all of these executive orders come down, as funding is pulled, as all these decisions are made. Are there efforts to build coalitions of nonprofits that can be involved in some of these lawsuits that are going up against the government to show that solidarity and all of that? Because
That's a great question.
we just had funding pulled, and we're very small. We don't have a lawyer connected with us. It's great to hear that that's available, but I think that's one of the things, getting back to what Mary and Shanique have been saying as well, that building those coalitions all swimming in the same direction. And I think the reality is that most of us don't have those connections and don't have those funds. So I'm wondering if there's any thought process happening with that right now.
Well, I'll speak to the lawsuits, and one is to say we don't all need to sue. And it's best if we don't, right? Because we have important work to do. You have important work to do. And so there's been, at this point, I think there's about 150, maybe even more, lawsuits against the administration. And in most of these lawsuits, it takes 2, 3, 4 plaintiffs to have the broadest possible coverage of protection if it's a good outcome in the lawsuit, and that's what's needed. And maybe there's declarants needed, other pieces, but we don't need at this point, for some of the actions that have been taken, really broad, like class action lawsuits, for example. So it's part of the strategy, right? Part of this move quickly and break things is to distract us all from the work that we should be doing. And I think we need to resist that where we can too. The day-to-day work that you're doing is important. The last and important to stay focused on, and I know you know that, but the last couple of weeks where there were these threats, these real rumors of potential executive orders around specific nonprofit organizations, all of these organizations at the national level dropped much of what they were doing and were suddenly talking to lawyers about their own organization and about potential lawsuits, and it sucked out so much oxygen from the important work of environmental justice, for example, or racial justice. So we don't all have to sue. There's major national groups like Democracy Forward who are incredible and who have about half of the lawsuits against the administration right now. We need to support them in doing their work on the legal front, and then we need to be building those coalitions, though, for the communications work, the advocacy work, for protecting the sector. And that's like a silver lining, too, that came out of, that comes from all of these threats, is that I've been doing this work for almost 30 years in the nonprofit sector, and I'm seeing now these breakthrough moments where foundations are working together in a new way, and nonprofit organizations are working together, and the nonprofits, of course foundations are nonprofits, but with the foundations, with the universities, with the hospitals, seeing that there's actually very little space between us when it comes to these threats, and starting to create some new collaborations and coalitions that'll strengthen us for the long run.
I can't resist one of the great political philosophers of all time, Congressman Barney Frank, once said, "There's nothing that unites the people of Earth like a threat from Mars." And today we have a threat from Mars. So it's time to get to it. Let's see, is anybody over here? Yeah, a couple of people have their arms up. Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie Crockford, President of Empower Success Corps. At this moment, one of the organizations that I think we all need to support is National Public Radio and PBS, and there is a way in which all of us need to be part of that fight. That's our fight. If they go down, the ability to get information out around the country is, I'd say, dissolved in some places. So just a reminder of who we still need to back.
Thank you. You know, we talked before about the multi-front, across-the-board attack on civil society.
Yep.
And when you think about it, direct concentrated attacks on the media, direct concentrated attacks on the judiciary, direct concentrated attacks on law firms, direct concentrated attacks on the scientific research establishment. It's
Yeah.
hard to imagine a stone they haven't left unturned yet, but this is what we're up against, which is why these get-togethers are so important, but also, to your point about the alliances with other affected parties. This is not an uncoordinated effort we are up against, and we need to be coordinated and more coordinated and smarter than they are.
That's right.
Question over here, handed back, Cindy.
Thanks. Hi, Cindy Rowe from JALSA, Jewish Alliance for Law and Social Action. I did want to comment on the Massachusetts scene and our building a table to fight back. In fact, it is called the Mass Fight Back Table that JALSA and the AFT Massachusetts are building across unions and across nonprofit organizations right now to work on a lot of the similar issues we are seeing across the different silos, speaking to Shanique's point about us working in silos. So I encourage people to get involved in that. And one of the things that has made people hesitant and is really the source of my question is some nonprofits are reluctant to exercise their political and advocacy muscles. And I'm hoping that some of you can comment and perhaps give them some confidence that this is the time that we all need to be pushing that envelope.
You know, that's a very good question, and we hear it a lot as well. What can I do and what can I not do from a legal standpoint as nonprofits? Shanique.
So I think that it depends on the advocacy and what the issue is. I just think about what I had said earlier about the folks who are doing this work. Some folks may not be safe. I mean, we've seen our student activists on campus be picked up by ICE for writing an op-ed at their college around Israel-Palestine, right? And so I would say for folks of color, like myself, we have to be so careful about our public visibility. And so I would say, number one, what are the ways that individuals and groups like that can take some sort of silent role that doesn't put them out in the physical public is something that folks should be thinking about in their advocacy spaces. And then I think organizations who do have advocacy muscles, do have registered lobbyists at their organization. We did see on the survey that there are organizations that are doing advocacy work and do have registered lobbyists, thinking about, you know, what are the issues that we're lobbying on that could be potential advocacy points that could help protect Massachusetts from some of what might be coming down. Massachusetts has been a leader in policy in many ways in the country around many issues, from environmental issues to abortion access, right? What are the ways are we setting examples in Massachusetts about what folks can be doing in other parts of the state? But I think it depends on doing your own analysis of sort of what is it that our organization can do without having great risk, and what are the ways that coalitions are pulling together efforts that includes ways that people can do advocacy work without being forward-facing, right? Maybe we are not on the lawsuits, but we are helping to give the narrative that might go into a lawsuit, right? So just thinking about ways to create that and doing some internal audits as an organization. What are we messaging on? What are the issues that we are focused on? What things can be put out in public and what things we're only doing in community silently, right? Those are the things that we need to be thinking about right now, and figuring out our advocacy points from there. I hope that's helpful, Cindy.
Mary and Diane, do you want to add anything?
I think that there are a couple of fights we can't afford to lose right now. I think we lost a huge one, and we cannot lose the Harvard fight. Not because it's Harvard, but because it represents intellectual freedom, First Amendment right, you name it. Harvard goes down, every institution goes down. That is one of those fights you cannot afford to lose. The other one that we lost, and it was such a missed opportunity, is the immigration. As a Commonwealth, we're losing population. We need newly arrived people. We need to bring people in, up the economic ladder, education, and we missed the opportunity, both from the not nonprofit, but maybe from the philanthropic side. What was the right dialogue? How should we have framed that issue? How should we have been supporting the Commonwealth of Massachusetts? Because right now, if we had gotten that right, Massachusetts might have the template for how you change immigration and how you welcome people and have a better immigration policy. Like, we've got to be thinking about not just what needs to happen today, but are there other fights like that if we get it right, it just changes the momentum or like the trajectory of the country? We keep missing them. And so for me, I know there's work we have to do right now. And in my sector, we're really helping to shore up philanthropy and get them to lead where they can, but also projecting, are there other things like that we have got to win, because if we don't, our democracy is going to crumble even faster. And I think immigration was one we completely missed the opportunity.
Diane?
Well, on advocacy, the vast majority of nonprofits can and should be doing more than they currently are legally. Of course, we have to consider risk and mitigate that, but the vast majority of what we all need to be doing right now is actually educating members of Congress and others about the important work that we do, about the impacts of federal funding in communities, about the threats and the risks of those funds being cut and what that means in communities. That's all education, and that's something all of us can be doing much, much more of. It's only actual lobbying if there's a bill number and we're asking for something to be done on that bill number. And again, for most of what we do in Congress, it's on the education side, and you can do much more.
I will add just one additional footnote. The clear, bright line that a 501c3 cannot do is endorse a candidate in an election. So if you're thinking about, don't go here, that's one place not. If you want to do that, change your status. But before that, as everyone has talked about, there is a wide range of activity. And we always tell people, listen, you don't need to be, neither you nor your organization needs to be, 20-year experts on anything. If you build and maintain and grow relationships with people in government who have an effect on your work, it is a positive thing. It's not something that happens with one conversation. It's repeated positive contacts in multiple times. You will learn from each other. They should know about your work. They want to know about your work. You build those relationships, they pay off over time. We are almost at wrap-up time for the panel, but let me throw out one more. I hate doing this quickly, but I can't resist. Let me ask all the panelists to close. Tell us about one person who inspires you today.
So I can't name just one. I'm inspired by, every day I am inspired by people doing this work in communities, and I'm overwhelmed in the best possible way with the number of people and organizations across the country that reach out to talk about the challenges that they face and the incredibly important work that they're doing. And I just want to tie it back to actually and then I'll give a specific, but tie it back to the importance of our speaking out in whatever ways we can, when we can, because we don't know who needs to hear our voice right now, or who needs to see our leadership, and what kind of strength and courage that can give them. And one of the stories that really sticks out to me, that I think about her often after we filed the first lawsuit, and many people were reaching out, and there was this one woman who works in a red state, in a rural part of a red state. She runs a rape crisis center. She's a staff of 2. And she said, our filing the lawsuit made her feel less alone. And it gave her strength to keep doing the work that she's doing. And it's people like her and so many more that inspire me and keep me moving forward.
Thank you. Mary.
So yes, last night I had the opportunity to go to the JFK Library for the Profile in Courage. and the awardee was Mike Pence. One would ask, why would you need to give an award to someone doing their job, right? Which was certifying the election. And in a moment where his whole party expected him to do something different, his president asked him to do something different, right? Where his family was in the chamber with him, he still made the right choice and he defended democracy, right? So he inspires me because in those moments when you think there's somebody on the other side thinking about something different or their views are totally opposed to yours, you would be surprised how people still want to defend their democracy. They think it's important to get out there. They will take a risk and they will do what's right. And so those are the folks that inspire me.
Thank you. Shanique.
Like Diana, I don't have a single person, but that's because I have the pleasure of working with 40 organizations and their leaders and their organizers. On April 30th, we had our all-partner meeting, so all our partners came together statewide. We had about 52 individuals in the room. We did a panel on immigration, so an opportunity for everyone in our network to learn from some of their peers around what they're doing in this moment. And it was a very heavy moment. There were tears in the room because we were, again, talking about issues that impact us greatly while doing the work. And in that moment, we held each other. We breathed together. We held space together. We ate together. We laughed together. And it reminded me why I get up every day and do this work. It's for individuals in this movement space. I have had the pleasure of coming to the table, having worked with half of these community organizations since I was 23 and was just a little baby organizer. So many of them have actually watched me grow up. And I've seen, no matter the executive director transitions, the organizers, the young people, our youth organizations, what they're doing right now, inspires me every day to get up and drive across stage for panels and to sit in difficult rooms and talk about why they need resources. They inspire me every day because I know they get up every day to fight for people like me. And that's important. And that's not a job everybody can do. And so bless those who do it, because it is hard to be an activist and a leader right now in the movement, and to do so as a person of color, to do so as a poor person, to do so as a person living in poverty. But I know that no matter what happens with philanthropic dollars, all of my organizations, whether they continue to be orgs or not, will still wake up every day and still do the same job every single day for their community, whether there's dollars behind it or not, because they do this for themselves, for their families, and for you all in community, and that's inspirational for me.
No better note on which to end. We'll keep the panelists up here. Lee Hanshu is going to give concluding remarks, and then we'll send everybody on their way.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Shanique, Mary, Diane, and Jim, and all of our presenters, Steve, Zaina, and Lee, for helping to ground us in the precarity of this moment for our sector, communities, state, and nation, and for challenging us to look inward and around us to harness our individual and collective skill sets, power, and resources for this marathon. It was a privilege to be able to hear from all of you today. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Lee Hanshu, Senior Program Officer, Nonprofit Sector Infrastructure here at the Boston Foundation. I'm here to wrap us up with some housekeeping items and some notes of gratitude. First, in the coming week, all registrants, virtual and in person, will receive an email with a recording of today's event, related collateral, speaker contact, as well as a link to TBF's new resource hub. We'll continue to add updates, actions, and resources as they develop. Second, I would like to extend a special thank you to the many people behind the scenes who partnered on the survey and today's event. A thank you to the rest of the MNN team, Jessica Sini, Claire Ladd, Molly McCraig, Megan Murphy, Richard Parr at MassInc Polling Group, my colleague in this work, Carlos Munoz-Cadilla, and my TBF colleagues across events, communications, public affairs as well. A big thank you to Partners Interpreting for providing ASL services today, Basil Tree for the food, and our partners at A Better Resolution for the expert AV.
A special note of gratitude to the over 30 partners across the state, community foundations, United Ways, capacity builders, fiscal sponsors, nonprofit coalitions who shared the survey with their local nonprofit communities so we could hear from over 500 folks from every corner of the state. I missed a bunch of lists of people to thank, but I see that the get off the stage buzzer is ringing. But I do want to add one comment, and at the risk of sounding saccharine, I want to close with an acknowledgement of what many in this room and online are carrying right now. You are caregivers, artists, managers, siblings, teachers, mentors, mutual aid organizers, students, patients, job seekers, coaches, counselors, neighbors, voters, multiple job holders, entrepreneurs, immigrants, and a million other things that are largely not found in grant applications, strategic frameworks, and other things. So I say that with the hopes that you will reach out if you need support to your trusted friends, family, folks in your network, and maybe even in spaces such as this where you work and lead. As someone who has the privilege of working in partnership with many of you in this room, to improve, sometimes eliminate, or even amplify systems that impact the workforce greatly, it is incumbent upon all of us to not lose sight of our individual and collective well-being in this moment and for the marathon. I do want to put an emphasis on this, though, not thinking about our well-being just because the work outputs, deliverables, and the important impact you do make happen, but for the simple fact that you matter and the people you serve matter, despite what the current federal administration says. So, thank you. So with that, let's keep the pressure on. Thank you and have a great afternoon.